Hi, this is Marlo Belmano, the producer of Latter-day Left.
With Cris away this week, Anneke fills in and sits down with Alain to discuss our national emergency, racism, socialism, and a lot more.
Don't forget, if you want to contact us, email us at latterdayleft@gmail.com. Now on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Latter-day Left. I'm Anneke.
And I'm Alain.
And we are here on a slightly getting warmer February afternoon.
Yeah, and it's just the two of us for a change.
Yeah.
We don't have to put up with Cris. That's why I said that.
Cris, we miss you already. It's a lot quieter in here, so your absence is noted. So we've got plenty of stuff going on in the world this week. For me, thinking about the things I wanted to talk about coming in this morning, it was really hard to get past the one big story, right? And the one big story as of today, which is Saturday, which by next week...
It's a crisis!
I don't know how bad the emergency will have gotten by next Wednesday, but Trump declaring a national emergency as a method to get his border wall funding that he had asked for.
Yeah. So there's so many things that we could talk about that. There's so many ways to look at that. Some people say, well, it's not an emergency, it's not a crisis. He admitted so much.
Yeah, well, I found the quote. This is really great. There's a piece in the New Yorker by John Cassidy, sorry. And he was he did not pull his punches, and he quoted the actual journalist's questions at the end. And one that was pretty telling was when they asked him, if you would have gotten more money for the border wall before the whole government shutdown, why is this an emergency now? And Trump says, I wanted to do it faster. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
I like that. I didn't need to do this.
I didn't need to do this.
Yeah,
this is a national emergency.
That takes away the national emergency thing.
I didn't need to do it. I saw a really good joke on it. Somebody was tweeting that said, "Hello, 911, what is your emergency?" Well, I don't need anything, but...
Yeah, exactly. So here's the one thing. I mean, people will debate. There'll be lawsuits and so forth. Congress has authorized through statute the president making a declaration of emergency, which allows him to kind of move monies around, which is exactly what he's doing. So some people are saying, well, this isn't a real emergency, so you could attack it on that basis, on the basis of you can't contrive the emergency and then create the emergency.
From what I understand of it, you know a lot more about this than me, but what is the precedent for things this has been used for before? It's usually like a natural disaster.
Natural disasters, if you have a real emergency, it might, the idea, if you have a national defense emergency, you need to move money around to get troops around.
Or so like 9/11, did they do this at all? Or?
And I'm not sure that it wasn't passed after 9/11. Here's the problem, because one of the arguments that people make is, look, the Congress hasn't totally shut this down. One way to look at it, if you analyze constitutional powers, the decision dates back to the 1950s when Truman nationalizes steel mills. And there's a famous case, Youngstown steel mill case, in which the Supreme Court gets to analyze, wait a minute, what did the president do and what did the Congress do? And it's in a concurring opinion by Justice Jackson, my hero, the one who went to be, the one who stepped down from the Supreme Court for a while to go to Nuremberg and be the lead prosecutor, and then came back to the Supreme Court. A really great giant, I think, of the legal mind, who says, let's analyze things this way. There are certain things that the president has the authority to do on his own. Article 2 says, you are this, you're the commander-in-chief, you get to command troops. Article 1 says, Congress gets to spend money. And so there are things that you can look at, okay, what source of power did the president use in acting? It could be that Congress has told the president, please do this. We pass a law, please do this, and the president does it. There's a lot of constitutional power there. You've got Congress's authority, you've got the executive branch's authority, and it's going to have to be something really, really weird so that the courts would find that it is not constitutionally authorized. And I used to always tell my students, if Congress passes a law saying that we no longer enfranchise black people, and the president then enforces that, while both of their powers have come to play, it would be ruled unconstitutional. But usually that's not going to be the case, because if Congress says, do something, here's some money, and the president does it, there's a huge amount of constitutional power. Sometimes the president acts on his own, and this was in the steel mill case, that's what had happened. The president says, I'm nationalizing the steel mills because I got the Korean War going on, and Congress had been asked to give him the authority to nationalize steel mills, and Congress had said no. So now you have the president acting on his own, and that's a much smaller piece of the constitutional authority. And then you have this where maybe Congress has not acted, or maybe Congress has acted in some way, and then the president acts. And there's sort of a middle ground there where you might have a little bit more authority. So let's look at what Trump did. Trump has the authority as the executive to protect the nation. He's going to declare a national emergency based on drugs and gangs and whatever. So he's got some color of authority there that flows from Article 2. He also has some color of authority that flows from Article 1, because we know that the Congress just gave $1.5 billion or $2 billion towards national border security or whatever.
Right.
Okay? And so now you have people saying, hey, look, the president is at this most powerful because he has Congress saying, oh yeah, we think this is important, and then he has his own executive branch authority. Here's my question. This analysis here does not apply, and here's why. Congress put a dollar figure on what it thinks is the appropriate amount to spend on border security right now. There's your $1.5 billion. Do we really want the president to say, oh, well, if the Congress has given me $1.5 billion, therefore I can use my authority to go get $5 billion. And if you can do that for the fencing wall, why can't you do it for anything else? Okay, and so now if you've opened up Pandora's box, okay?
And we had a fun exchange. I say we as in I follow my Congress people on Facebook, and they have a feature now where it gives you a little badge if you're their actual constituent, so you can see who's replying, who lives in that district. And I'm in Cris Stewart's district, and he
I want to talk about
was a little more. Yeah, he was a little more open about, Mitt Romney gave a non-answer, some of the other people gave non-answers, and he said he really disapproved of Trump's action there. And his reasoning, and this is where it gets funny, was it sets a dangerous precedent, because what if a future president was to declare a national emergency for climate change or gun safety?
Yes,
which everybody then said,
yes,
those are actual national emergencies.
By the way, those are actually emergencies.
Right. Like there's actual data behind those things that would make a far more compelling case for emergency. Yeah,
but he's worried because a Democratic president could say, we now have an emergency. We know that national health is important because Congress devotes money to it. Right. Therefore, I'm declaring Medicaid for all.
I'm turning the $1 billion into $100 billion.
Exactly, and I'm because this is an emergency. Or my wife and I were talking last night, watching the news, and she made the comment: there is a mass shooting in America every single day. And it was funny because what I said to her is, I said, well, honey, it doesn't sound like a lot when you think that there are 330 million Americans. And so if you have one a day, that's 360 Americans that went nuts. Gee, that's only 0.01% or something, whatever my math is, and she said, well, when you put it like that, it's not a lot. I said, but it is a lot. It's a lot because
you can compare it to any other country's rate of gun violence.
And it's a lot because there is in the American psyche, and now I'm going to offend people who consider themselves more Americans than I, but there is in the American psyche an acceptance of violence. And we talked about it last night. And now I know I'm someplace where you didn't think we were going to go, but maybe I didn't know we were going to go there either. But we have this sort of acceptance that, look, violence in our country is a given. Right. Mental health issues. There's a lack of emotional intelligence in our society, in our culture, that you get angry. And this morning I was reading an article about people in Minnesota where they have tons of snow, and so the plows are coming through the neighborhoods, and they did this to us here a week ago Monday or something. we're out shoveling and the plow goes by and there's a nice little wall at the end of your driveway now.
Right, that you just cleared off.
And it's full of boulders, of ice and everything. And it's hard to, and so in Minnesota, these two people lost it with the plow driver, and one of them was wearing his gun and the other one threatened to go get his gun. And I'm saying, what kind of a society is this? And well, it's a society where violence is an acceptable form of how we relate to one another. We have no emotional intelligence. And we don't teach that.
Right.
We don't develop that in our people.
It's seen as a weakness. It's seen as a thing, especially on the male side of things. We teach just our men and boys to not...
Well, the whole stand your ground thing.
Yeah, we don't communicate our emotions because that's a sign of weakness until it absolutely just gets to a point where it explodes out. Yeah. And that's been, there's psychology behind that. That's not just me as a bleeding heart person saying that. Yeah. There's psychology behind that. That's the way people act.
I mean, it's guns are one thing, as you were mentioning. But I said to her, and this is kind of an odd position for me to take. But in a conversation I had with her, I said, look, they have lots of guns in Switzerland and nobody gets shot in Switzerland because there is a mentality that I have to be responsible.
Yeah, well, we have more gun violence than Israel. I saw a write-up of us compared to all these other countries, and Israel and Switzerland are two of the other highest gun per capita countries, and it's nowhere near what we have.
Exactly.
And of course there's a million other factors. That's any social science thing is a big tangle of factors going on.
There's always all kinds of things.
Another thing is, we've got a lot more heterogeneous society than those places do, and that is correlated with that.
Yeah.
Our poverty stuff we deal with is correlated to,
it's right.
to racial differences, to class and things like that, because we've got a lot less of a uniform society. So that's a thing that we know is uniquely American, but is it uniquely American enough? And of course the mental health thing gets thrown out there. Oh, it's just mental health. Is there that much more of a mental health problem here than anywhere else?
I don't know. Per capita?
No, there's not.
I don't think so.
There's not. And you give or take of mental health issues as any other human society on the planet.
But we don't have enough help for the people.
We don't have the
safety net. Exactly.
And we may have a lot easier time finding guns. So, anyway, that's...
So back to the national emergency.
Going back to national emergencies. There's compelling cases for that. Climate change, that's the thing I brought up. But I was like, if you don't think climate change is an emergency...
It absolutely is.
You're not listening to the people who know what they're talking about.
So Stuart is pretty smart.
And so what I said to him, and I was being a smart aleck, I said, okay, blink twice if you're just saying these things because your base wants to hear them. Because this guy, his district is part of Salt Lake, my little wedge of Salt Lake, and then down to St. George and stuff. It's a huge chunk. Yeah. There's no way they want their congressman talking about anything else. So I'm like, is this just his way of being like, okay guys, Trump's being ridiculous, and I'm gonna put a boogeyman President Elizabeth Warren out there to scare you about this. Yeah.
Well, which some of us would wish. Anyway, one of the interesting thing here is that Mike Lee made a comment that, well, I think that, as much as I don't like that the president did this, given the Congress has given him some authority, it's probably legal. One of the things I had talked about last night was how do we get to challenge this? People are saying, oh, we're going to file lawsuits. Okay, who has standing? Fundamental to any lawsuit in our federal system. The plaintiff has to have skin in the game. The plaintiff has to have some degree of impact, personal impact, which is necessary to give them the standing to go to court. Taxpayer standing has been basically thrown out. The Supreme Court says taxpayers don't have standing. If your complaint is they're using my money wrong, that is not standing to challenge
everyone
anything.
In the country, right?
So who is going to have standing to challenge this nomination of an emergency? The Congress, to some degree. It has been a long time since the Congress filed a lawsuit against the president.
Yeah, has that happened?
Yeah. It's happened in the past, but it's been a long time. And the problem with Congress is, who's Congress? Does the House of Representatives take a vote and the majority wins, or is it the minority? No. So it's people who don't. So typically it's difficult to get a consensus that Congress can be the plaintiff. Right. They actually have to act in concert.
Right.
I would say the House would have to pass something saying, stop that. The Senate would have to pass something saying, stop that. What? He's going to veto it and they can't override the veto. Therefore, Congress may not have standing. The states what state has standing? Does Oregon and Washington State have standing to challenge the declaration of emergency down on the border, which is taking money out of the Pentagon's budget, out of the war on drugs? They don't have standing to do that.
What if there's a natural disaster that would have been, what if we have another hurricane in Puerto Rico? Is that something? I don't think Puerto Rico is going to get standing for anything anytime soon. But is there something that, if something happens, that would have been covered by funds that were diverted?
So we have to wait until see if the funds have been diverted, but then maybe other funds would be diverted at that point to help them. So it could very well be something that he gets away with. But I think
that's so disheartening.
The problem for those who support him is really that it does open the door, and I think Stewart, while he may be just doing this to appease his base, Stewart's not wrong in this. Mm-hmm. It is the kind of thing that if you think that we're not if you think that this isn't going to form some kind of a relationship between the president and Congress. Look, Congress has been bleeding power to the executive branch for 50, 60 years, okay? And what's real funny about that is that from a national security perspective, I have in the past always supported a strong executive. Obama sending the Air Force to help the Arab Spring, I thought that's pretty much that's all within his bailiwick. He gets to do that. But also, the other side is like, hey, you can't declare war. Well, he didn't declare war. In fact, we're not at war with the Libyans. We're helping the Libyans against their own government. We're not at war with Libya. We're at war with a Libyan dictator, which the people in Libya wanted to get rid of. You can cut that mustard a lot of different ways. But what happens now is that this opens the door to far greater type of this.
And then does it become a pendulum? It's like, well, next time we get 51% of the electoral college, we're going to go all out to get as much, of our, I say our as
agenda.
But our agenda towards, well, let's do something really drastic for climate change. Let's do something really drastic. Yeah. And that makes that part of the electorate so mad that they elect somebody back in. And, when does that end?
It does. So what's interesting is some of the pushback to the opposition to what Trump did coming from the right is, hey, you guys shoved Obamacare down our throat. The difference there is that the ACA was passed.
That was passed in Congress.
Passed both houses of Congress and then was signed into law.
Yeah.
So there's no equivalence there at all.
Barack Obama did not stand up and say, this is an emergency, I'm taking over.
Right.
That wasn't an executive order. It wasn't. That was exactly how
that's the way the system is supposed to be.
Work.
It passed both houses of Congress and it was signed into law. But this is actually going contrary to Congress's actions. Congress says, here's $1.5 billion, and now you're going to get $8 billion. And this is, so maybe there is some room to, for the courts to say, you've gone too far. One of the problems that I have...
Well, and if it ends up in front of the Supreme Court now that he's got, tilted towards the conservative side, is Brett Kavanaugh going to vote for that?
I think Brett Kavanaugh will vote for that, and I think the other one that Gorsuch is going to vote for that. I'll tell you who might not, because I'm becoming a fan of the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice understands that he has a responsibility and has now voted with the liberal wing on several issues. Because, look, he was the one who saved the ACA.
Yeah.
Because
the Supreme Court wasn't supposed to be a partisan court.
Exactly. And I think with Kennedy's departure, I think that we could see the Chief Justice saying, now wait a minute, we have an institutional role to play in this democratic structure that we call the United States. And I see him changing a little bit, which, we've seen that happen before, okay? I mean, if you think about some of the movements that have taken place in the history of the court's decisions, it has been Chief Justices Warren, who wasn't expected to be a liberal, who kind of said, no, it's time to do away with the old crow, racism. I see the Chief Justice now saying, I've got to be able to defend the constitutional structure.
Yeah.
This isn't about politics. So we'll see. I mean, maybe he doesn't. But,
Yeah.
the problem to me is going to be who has standing. Who has standing to challenge
to get
that?
a case even that far.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is certainly, something we could talk about for 3 hours. But part of it that I thought was, at least makes the case hardier is the actual things that Trump, and we know, I mean, the people, okay, all of our audience doesn't need to be convinced of this. They are pretty on board with the fact that there's not an actual emergency happening there, and this course of action is not the course of action that will help us get there. But there is enough of Americans who are being just convinced by the rhetoric of it all that this is an emergency. There's caravans of people coming, and then Trump, his points he brought up himself is that there's these dangerous criminals / intimations of terrorists coming in, that there is drugs and that there is human trafficking. And that was he's just there's a river of it. And the people during his press conference called him out, point by point on that and said, there's actually fewer people coming in for asylum
Exactly.
than there were. There's half as many as there were 10 years
exactly.
ago. There's fewer drugs coming through there. There's less, and then his response to that was, well, that's fake news. And then he literally said that to him, the fake news. And then, well, where's your numbers? Where are you getting your figures on this? And he says, oh, I get them for my people. It's broad. He doesn't have to cite things. In any other...
He gets it. We know where he gets it. It's Fox and Friends and Amity.
Here's this is a really spooky thing. I read an article a couple weeks back that took some of his weirder talking points and put together this theory. So he has this talking point about they find prayer rugs in the desert coming to
the movie,
right? Yeah. And that they've got really fast cars that drive so fast we can't catch them with human trafficking victims inside.
We don't have cars like that.
There are these bizarre, there are these bizarre things that he kept bringing up. And somebody said these are plot points in the movie Sicario, the sequel, whatever it's called. And it's is he honestly getting his view and concept of how border security works from a movie he saw? Which it looks like he probably is.
He is, apparently.
And in any other situation, so I'm in a job right now. I'm in kind of the corporate world. I came out of the academic world, and I feel like the corporate world is a little more watered down, but we still have to put data up whenever we're making a proposition or we want to propose, we want to sell something, an idea. In the academic world, you have to put the idea up, and you have to support it, and you have to have read the past 10 years of other people's stuff, and you have to put that up there, and then whoever's going to read it is going to say, well, you didn't read this guy's paper, so there's a lot of work you have to do to bolster your arguments. Then in the corporate world, it's a little less, nobody cares that much about it. They're just, whatever's going to make us the money, right? That's the bottom line. But I still, if I have a proposition to make to the team above me, I have to go with a decent looking, I write a 10-word Word document and they tell me to turn it into a PowerPoint slide, and then I have to give them a decent looking PowerPoint slide. But that has to have some stuff, and they want to see numbers that are going to tell them why this is worth our money. Politics, doesn't this seem like the place where you would need that the most? Because we've got different people with different agendas. We really need to see what are the actual numbers, what are the projections, what's going on, and the data about these things that are happening. None of it is supporting that narrative.
Yeah, this is, and I've taken the Utah State Legislature to task for that, where they legislate out of ignorance. Mm-hmm. In order to appease
because of an ideology,
or, rather than looking at, they do this concept. They're doing this the same thing now, and this is exactly Trump's ideas. I'm going to come up with this thing that supports what I want to do because I want to do it because for whatever reason, and there is no attempt to support it with data, with analysis, and anything that contradicts what you want to do. It's fake news.
Right, right. And there is legitimate news. I found this article this week. This is from NPR on the 15th. Behind the border crisis, more migrant families risk dangerous remote crossing. So whereas migrant families would come appeal for asylum at an actual port of entry, now because of the chilling effect of that, they're actually crossing rivers and deserts, which is more problematic. You have to do that illegally through paying people to smuggle you through, and those people aren't necessarily have your best interests. So there's more of that going on. The actual drug trade is nobody's strapping cocaine to their back and walking through the desert. You know, those guys are in Cadillac Escalades. They're not, you know. Yeah. I've seen Breaking Bad, right? That's how it works. But
well, you can watch your movie like he watches his movie.
Even that was a joke. The data is showing that that's how, you know, they're hiding it in other stuff that's going through the border.
It's coming in ports of entry. It's not coming in through the desert.
Right.
We don't have enough inspectors, you know.
And who would think that, like, a wall on that border is going to, like, all the drug cartels in Mexico are going to go, oh, well, I better just change industries. Let's take up fishing.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah,
like, that's, like, they're not going to find a way.
The El Chapos of the world have already shown us that there's billions to be made, and therefore the wall's not going to stop them. By the way, if you do want somebody to pay for the wall, how about tapping El Chapo?
Yeah,
he's got billions.
Seriously, just sell his tigers and stuff. You know, we can. And here's the one other story I wanted to bring up, not related directly to that, but this story it made me mad and it made me ashamed to be from where I'm from. So, this week in Havre, Montana, which is about 30 miles from the Canadian border, two women who are Latina women, but they are American citizens. They both, you know, were born here, were speaking Spanish in a gas station in Havre, Montana. And I can attest that this is a little out of the ordinary there because we have a Hispanic population in Montana of like 10 guys, right? It's just not a place where there's a lot of people living. Yeah. And a what are they called? CBP, Customs and Border Protection officer, detained them, asked for their papers, and they were detained.
We don't have any papers!
Right.
We're not Nazi Germany!
You're not required to carry your passport on you at all times.
We don't carry papers.
For 40 minutes. They were detained for 40 minutes, and they're asking why, and he said, I saw that you guys are speaking Spanish, which is very unheard of up here. So what did he think they were? He thought that they were, Honduran migrants don't go around the country on a ship to Canada and come in that way.
I don't know, but maybe they ought to, because...
yeah, I mean, it's obviously, that's still open. Nobody's building a wall there. But,
don't give them any ideas.
People who are poor enough to actually be coming here aren't doing that.
They're not.
ISIS or whoever they thought that was, they're not going to send a couple of Latin ladies up to come down through Havre, Montana. Like, what exactly did he think the threat was here? But the real problem is, it's becoming
it's that mentality.
It's a de facto police state for a lot of people.
Yes.
You know, all they were doing was speaking a language, which, by the way, the United States does not have an official language.
There
is nothing
Don't get me started about English as an official language.
Right.
It is simply not true. And I know Utah has one of those laws and so many other states. But it's nonsense. And you know what? I spent the morning at a Spanish session at the LDS Temple here in Draper, and of course I don't speak Spanish, but there were a lot of people talking Spanish, and I'm listening in, trying to pick up a few words because and then somebody turned towards me and asked about, you know, was I catching any of it, and so I responded in French, and there's another brother who works there who speaks French, and I mean, and this is to me was such a contrast to your story that you know. This is where the church ought to be. This is where our culture ought to be. If you're a Latter-day Saint, you ought to be welcoming of all the countries, all the world, because that's what the church mission is, right? It's to go out to the whole world.
Well, and we have specific scripture that says that we believe everyone will be able to learn the gospel in their own tongue.
In their own tongue,
and that's why the church devotes a lot of resources towards translating things into languages that don't make economic sense, you know.
Because we're not in it for the money.
Right. And that's what everybody else will be like, why are you, like, you have two people reading this, you know? And they're like, well, if there's two people,
good.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah.
When I was working at the church in the publishing services, I always say it wrong, they were in the process of translating a lot of the church stuff into a couple Inuit languages, which I thought was super cool. You know, that's not ever going to be a huge booming population, you know, it's obviously, but it's important enough for people to be able to talk about the gospel in their own language, in their own culture.
And so the acceptance, so the acceptance of the various, versus these people who say, hey, they're speaking Spanish in Montana, there's something fishy going on. The only thing fishy going on is these people whose minds are so closed to reality. Frankly, here's what I told somebody this morning when we were talking about languages, you know, and somebody made the comment about, oh, you know, I'm sorry, I speak English with an accent, and I said, don't be sorry. It means that you're intelligent enough to know a different language.
You're speaking in your second language.
You're speaking two languages,
which is more than the vast majority of Americans do.
And so be glad for that. And you know the whole idea. I said to him, He said, well, people think, and he said, I get told all the time, this is America, I need to learn to speak English. And I said, you tell those people that when the United States was formed, there were more German speakers in the colonies than there were ever English speakers at that time. And so maybe we should all be speaking German?
Yeah.
I mean, it makes no sense at all. And so people are to speak what they need to speak. And it works out. It's important to learn to speak English because that's the way you get ahead in our society. I'm not telling.
Well, and guess what? People do anyway.
And people do.
And I've said this before here on this podcast, but people who are worried about, all these immigrants coming, not understanding our language. Your great-grandma did the same thing. My great-grandma lived in Chicago speaking German in Chicago for most of her life. That's one thing. It's a generational thing of when you move there.
Exactly.
All their kids
Absolutely.
are, and we have a hard time getting our kids to speak Spanish at all. My husband's a native Spanish speaker. Well, he's been here most of his life, but our plan was the kids are going to learn Spanish from him and English from me, and they don't want to because all their peers, everybody they see on TV, it's people assimilate quicker than the heritage of their culture wishes they would.
And even if these grown women are speaking Spanish, so what?
Right.
So what? And so this is an example of a story that really exemplifies, I think, the tribalism that has come to rule in our land. And it breaks down. I mean, it really is. It breaks down societies. It breaks down communities. It's a breakdown of the United States. There have always been people in the United States who spoke different languages.
Yeah.
And yet by the second or third generation, they've assimilated.
Well, and we had, Acadians. Going way back, we had the German settlers. We had, this isn't a new thing.
No, it's never been a new thing.
Okay, here's I'm going to kind of segue, but what is new is where people are coming from, and we were okay for a while with other European groups. We were okay with,
the Chinese went through it.
The Chinese had a
hard time. The
Japanese
went through it. World War II.
Right. We have a hard time when people are too different from us.
They're too different from us.
That's rooted in our biology in a way. I'm not going to say biology. It's rooted in our human nature in a way that we see as if it's a visual difference. It's hard to bridge that gap if you look really different from me.
But you would think that hey, this is where I don't understand it because look, I come from France, obviously very European in my outlook on things and in my I mean even the way we live, okay? But I look at the people coming from Central South America. I look at the Hispanic, and that's too big,
that's
broad.
A really big group, but
that's too broad a group. But and I'm saying they're more Europeans.
Yeah.
They're more European looking to me. They're more European acting than so there ought to be an affinity with the Americans.
Yeah.
You would think so because most white Americans come from Europe.
A lot of Latin America, not all of it, but a lot of areas have a really integrated in a way, in a sad way, but a lot more integration of two really different peoples, or three or four, than we ever have in North America. And it was the way they were colonized and settled. In English-speaking places, it was, men in leadership posts who would come first, and then families would come and settle.
Right.
In those areas, men would come, and there wasn't a Spanish wife back home that they brought over. They married a local lady,
exactly.
And that created a really different society. And in a lot of ways, there's been a lot of heartbreak there, but in a lot of ways, they're a lot more successful. If you look at a nation like Brazil, they've got, every ethnicity in the world all in one big melting pot there in a way that's been a lot more successful. And that kind of brings me to the other thing I was thinking about this week, which is I've read a couple things and heard a couple things about Black History Month, which we're in the middle of. And here's where my little train of thought started. So my personal family, my roots, I've been looking a lot through my family tree and stuff, and there's so much cool stuff you can do online. Half of me is, I've got a quarter German. I've got a grandpa whose parents were first generation, and then the other half is Midwestern, British, a little bit of French, all that stuff. The other half of me, my dad's family has been in the United States South for hundreds of years, and I don't find lines going back to Europe in that side of my family for a really long time. And I had this thought, I was like, my family has been in the South for a really long time, and I have zero African blood in me. And if you think about the weirdness of that you've had these two groups of people living in an area for hundreds of years, since the 1600s, and there were people from African backgrounds and people from white backgrounds. People from the African backgrounds have all kinds of European blood intermingled with those. But we have kept people so artificially segregated for so long that group of people and their histories and their heritage never moved the other way. And if you think about how sad that is and how much we lose and how detached that makes us from a big chunk of American culture, because it has been visibly other. It has always, until very recently, been, that's those people and their issues. And then I heard a really interesting interview, and this was an interview on the media on NPR, and it was actually, the author wrote a piece for the New Yorker last year at this time, because it was Black History Month then, and her name is Doreen St. Felix, and it was really interesting because she was talking about the history of Black History Month, and kind of the sanitized way that it's portrayed. And now people, at least, okay, this is terrible, but at least we've gotten past the visible outward racist. At least we're not like, get them out of my neighborhood, I don't want them coming to my schools. And that's why people think, oh, we're post-racist. We don't have problems anymore. But we're in this stage where we think we're doing better because, hey, it's Black History Month. I bought a stamp with Martin Luther King on it. I'm doing my part. Yeah. But then we are only portraying a really narrow sliver, and we're portraying the least troublesome parts of it. And she mentioned the fact that everybody knows who George Washington Carver is, right? Everybody's like, oh yeah, I know about George Washington Carver. He was a cool guy. He invented peanut butter. Right. Everything's great. But a lot of the stuff he did was to help Black farmers in the South. Indeed. And that was kind of sanitized as, well, let's just talk about the cool peanut stuff he did. Martin Luther King is the same way. We're like, he's got all these really great, really nice Christian tinged, speeches he gave. And then his later years especially, he did a lot of really, socially based, socialist based, Christian theology socialist-based teaching that nobody likes to touch. It's the social gospel. And then at the time, you had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was really scary to a lot of white people. They were like, I don't know. Militant. As long as the black people can do what they want, as long as they're not scaring me. And we have this really weird little slice of sanitized history, and that's all that anybody knows, except for if you were raised in an area where that was, specifically taught, or if you were in the black community, and even kids within the black community might not have. I think they probably didn't know it. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that certain things are coming out now, and there was one thing that I saw this week again. Things have been coming about African American that were involved in the space program. Yeah, those are really cool stories. Those are very cool stories about these very super intelligent women who actually figured out how to, and calculated how to get to the moon without a calculator. Yeah. I mean, basically without a computer, and got us there and back. Mm-hmm. And they get none of the credit because they were just women working in the back. And many of those were African American women, it turns out. Yeah, which was interesting. A lot of that we lose, and then a lot of the less comfortable stuff we lose. And I've been. This is okay. The sad part about this is it's totally self-serving. I've been trying to learn more about African American history because when I was studying to go on Jeopardy, that's something that I was like, I don't know hardly anything about this. I've lived in really white places my whole life, so I've been trying to read and find out about who are the prominent scholars and authors and stuff. And I think one of the problems is that a lot of the really prominent people wrote about really uncomfortable things. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of, there's crime. There's all kinds of stuff. But because that was so much a part of their experience as a people. Sure. And it's uncomfortable for us to have to confront that. And I think, it's uncomfortable for them also. And it's really uncomfortable for them to have lived that for generations. Let me tell you what happened. Yeah. When I was at West Point, we put together a civil rights lesson plan for part of our constitutional law. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we wanted to do, which we did, is we got a hold of some of the old footages and showed the cadets the walk across the bridge and the dog attacks. And I wanted to portray that to these future leaders in our army. And you know who complained? It wasn't the white cadets. Huh. It was the black cadets. Really? It's the black cadets who came to me and who said, "You can't show this. We're uncomfortable seeing this." And I'm saying, first of all, it's history. Second of all, it fits right in with what we're doing, and I'm doing it to teach people who haven't seen that history. And this particular black cadet said, "I heard all these stories from my grandmother, and I don't want to hear them again." Interesting. So it's because to him, he's like, "Hey, at the military academy now,
I've made it, and don't remind me of my past. So it was interesting that's where the pushback came from when I was teaching that.
And there's that, there's the historical stuff and the kind of physical obvious stuff. There's the less obvious stuff, and here's another thing that I've noticed, and I've noticed this in white culture, and I've noticed it big time in Mormon culture. There's stuff that's not quote unquote uplifting, and we don't want to spend time there.
Yeah.
And a lot of art and literature and music by Black people, by other minority groups, is, it has bad words in it. It talks about uncomfortable themes. It's, and we feel, like, well, I'm too good for that. I'm too good to, that's a bad influence, and we lose a lot of.
We lose the understanding.
This maybe is going to be a little controversial with an LDS audience, but like, how are we going to ever understand people if we're not going to listen to anything with a curse word in it? And this past week was also the Grammys, which a lot of people, me included, okay, I'm at the age where I'm like, okay, is this what happens to everybody when you get into your 30s, or is the music just bad?
You stop caring about it?
I'm like, it's all bad. It's so boring and terrible.
Yes.
It's not all bad, because here's the one thing. The song of the year went to a song called This Is America by Childish Gambino, who's a rapper, who's a very talented guy. He's the actor Donald Glover. He's been in Star Wars. He does everything. This dude is like, I don't know if he sleeps. But the song itself and the music video that goes with it is disturbing. And it's not outwardly like, hey, this is a scary shock thing. It's talking about gun violence. It's doing it in a symbolic, artsy way. And you can watch it and you're like, oh, hey, this is a cool, groovy song. And then all of a sudden there's these people getting shot on screen in a really just like gut punch kind of way. The fact that went and got Song of the Year, I think at least is one thing that's standing there, that we're listening to sad, disturbing things presented, by a cool, admired guy. But I think there needs to be more awareness of that kind of stuff. And I don't know if any of that gets through to a big chunk of white America, to a big chunk of LDS America.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think
it's not very uplifting.
It's not uplifting at all. And of course, but part of the problem is we have this, we have this sort of idea that, and of course, I think the teachings that we be positive and that we try to uplift and everything. Mm-hmm. We have to find ways to be to do that, to do more of that. I think it's because those things in our mortal state will have a negative impact on us, and so we try, But if you think about God, He's got His entire creation there. Mm-hmm. He understands what the worst of the worst is out there.
Yeah.
If you're naive enough to think, oh yeah, I'm just going to be like Heavenly Father someday, well, that means you're going to have to see some. You have to see some of that stuff, and you have to realize that I've chosen a different path, and I have to help my children to get away from that to get to the different path. We do have a tendency to kind of whitewash everything, and maybe the term is not punning. We do have a tendency to want to say, okay, everything is going to be all right, but we don't understand the depth. We talk. Look, as Latter-day Saints, we talk the platitude. Mm-hmm. Oh, everybody has their free choice. There has to be opposition in all things, and do you understand what that really means?
Yeah. Opposition is scary and dark.
And dark and ugly.
And there's people, I've seen this in people who I know who are converts to the church, who come from a really different background. I've seen it in people who have been born and raised in good Mormon families and have gone through really terrible things that nobody talked about.
Sure.
And that's another thing that's coming up in our culture now more and more. It's like, no, really bad things happen, and this person needs to be able to know that they're not the only one in the world that experienced it. And it's really hard to draw a line because you don't want to re-traumatize people, in the way you talk about things, but you also want to acknowledge that things exist, that really bad stuff happens.
The problem with that is that it challenges our faith. Mm-hmm. If bad things exist, then is God really there?
Right. And that's a really hard question.
It becomes very difficult. I know people who survived the Holocaust. This one man who said, I don't believe in God anymore. He was interviewed. He said, I don't believe in God anymore. You don't believe in God anymore? Why not? Because of the Holocaust. I mean, he said, I was at Auschwitz, and I don't believe in God anymore. Well, why did you lose your faith? Well, because of the terrible horror. And then he said this. He says, when I see him, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. So,
right. It's like, yeah.
So he does believe in God.
Right. But
he's struggling because he lost his family. And when You talk about children who are abused, and then they go to Sunday school and to
oh, you know how bad it is for kids who, have the Father's Day presentation at class, and either don't have a dad in their life, or they were abused by someone, or, that's really deep stuff. We need to at least be saying things, and there are church leaders who will say things that in past years would have just gotten glossed over.
Elder Holland, I think,
love that he'll say stuff like that. He's like, some of you haven't seen a happy family, and this is hard, and I'm going to acknowledge that, and it's real.
So let me tell you, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was asked to be the final speaker. I was asked to be the final speaker, and so, of course, that means that I'm the accordion speaker. I'm supposed to have my 10 minutes, or 12 minutes, but it turned out to be 5 minutes because everybody else goes long. And so I'm having to shut down. As and it was on faith. So I had this whole thing. I was going to start out with Joseph Smith lectures on faith, and I did kind of mention, faith is an article of power. It's an article of action. And as I was preparing to talk, I was kind of thinking, okay, I need to make it applicable to everybody, this idea of faith. And so I said, okay, I'm going to, there's a youth speaker, so I'm going to talk about, the 15-year-old, she needs faith. And maybe you're the parent of a 15-year-old, or parent of an 18-year-old leaving on her mission, or, maybe you're the new couple with a kid, and, or maybe, so wherever you are in life, maybe you're like me, and there's more days behind you than there are in front of you. But you still have to have that faith. As I was preparing to talk, the thought came into my mind, you have to include two other groups of people here. You have to include the woman who never got married, and you have to include the couple that doesn't have children and can't have children but want them. Because in our society, if you're married and without children, then there's something wrong with you. And if you're not married, there's something wrong with you. And so I thought, this is kind of strange. And I put it into my talk. And I mentioned it really quick. And again, my talk went from 12 minutes to 5 minutes, and I was done. I received cards. I received text from people saying, and I know the people, your talk to me. Because they were one of these people. They were one of these people that normally gets marginalized in our happy, we are, this is Zion and everything is wonderful. Everything's not wonderful. Everything is not wonderful for most of us. We all have this bit.
For different reasons.
For different reasons. But we all have this bit. But that's, again, is part of the gospel. That's part of the teachings.
Yeah.
And as a community, of Latter-day Saints, we should embrace that difference and not try to continue to marginalize people.
Right, and like I said, there are people that I see and the people I hear stuff from that is really hitting those notes, but it's hard to recognize what you yourself are not currently.
Well,
and
because we're all
it's hard to think
distraught.
about. Yeah, and we can't think about 20 factors at once. Yeah. But to be more, and that's the definition of privilege, right? That's like my privilege is not having to worry about stuff like that. Right, in this little Utah setting, it might have been my privilege is I have a happy family and I have a spouse and kids or whatever. In some people's area, there might be an LGBT kid sitting in that congregation who is listening for one thing that can acknowledge what they're going through. Yep. And most people are just blissfully like, oh, we never have to worry about this. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, it's the racial issue. In a lot of cases, and that's what I hope we could get across more is when we're having these conversations about inclusion and things like this, a lot of the times it's not one specific, it's not don't be a racist in like kicking black people out of your schools. Like that was obviously a problem in the past.
Yes, that was in the 50s.
There's way more deeper rooted stuff in here that we have to identify and pull out, and that's something we're still working on. And if somebody calls you, and this is the governor of Virginia again, right? This is Northam.
Yep.
If somebody calls you out on something racist, saying I'm not a racist is a 1950s answer
as opposed to saying
2019 problem.
As opposed to saying, I did something wrong here.
Yeah.
And look.
And it was the whole culture of the time that was obviously the problem. The fact that everybody in my medical school saw this yearbook and had no problem with it is a problem we need to talk about.
Exactly. So, the joke is embrace your mistakes. Embrace your mistakes and learn from them. The joke is I told my wife to embrace her mistakes, and so she hugged me. But we all of us want to say, no, they don't. Rather than saying, I was part of the problem, or, even in church, and I'm not going to go sit to these people, and why? Why aren't you going to go sit with these people? What's wrong with these people? Well, they're wearing blue jeans to church.
Right.
You know what?
Right.
I mean, that's
and whatever the situation. Like
Thank
they've got
they're
too
in
much
church.
facial hair. They've got
whatever. Yeah, exactly.
They're one of those people that I'm sure Jesus wouldn't want me to sit next to. I'm like, I think you should probably go reread Jesus.
I think you do need to reread
you
Jesus.
might need to have another little critical eye on what he had to say.
The whole, and just to since we brought that up, just to make the point that the Christian right seems to have gone so far off the rail.
Yeah.
On we're Christians, but we don't love the people that Christ told us to love.
We don't love. We're going to make a list of the kind of people that we don't love, that are problematic, that are standing in the way of our worldview, and it's become a little factions thing. To them, where it never should have been. Another one of the things we were going to try to bring up, since, it's just a casual little conversation, I wanted to kind of segue into some thoughts that you had before with some of the MLK stuff, and he went into, especially concentrated more in his later years on the Christian socialist ideals, and, he took his racial equality stuff, which was still a big thing, but that's kind of all we remember
the
him
social
for.
gospel.
And he was talking about social justice and stuff like that.
Exactly right.
And that's something that comes up a lot these days, and it's something that I hear people say things, and I'm like, is it 1935? Like what year is it?
Well, we heard the president in the State of the Union. We'll never be a socialist country.
Yeah,
your congressman,
right,
who started the anti-socialist club or something like that. And the whole thing is, he's a retired Air Force. Look, I'm a retired Army guy. The military is very socialistic. Very social in terms of the providing the safety net. You're not going to starve. You're going to have a house, and in fact, what ruins that is when the conservatives say, "Oh, we're now going to have contractors do it." Yeah, that breaks down that whole system. But the military has always been a very socialistic, and so Stewart is a product of that. Right, and that's the disconnect, that we're like, well, if you're saying no socialism, where are you drawing the line? Are you like, we're all going to be, fend for yourself, total... That's the jungle! Libertarian. That is the theory of the jungle. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. And or are you, obviously there's some measure of social interaction, of social contract, our favorite phrase, built into this. Where is your line, and why is it so much worse to draw your line over where, a Bernie Sanders or someone, or, even not that far would draw the line. And it was funny that you brought up, the military. I was asking a question because in my work, I'm in the healthcare industry, not the healthcare providers, but the industry around it. And I was just, honestly wondering, so I was asking a couple friends online, the VA hospitals are having so much trouble, and they've just got, they don't have enough services, it's not in enough places, and I'm like, why aren't we just giving, veterans a really good Medicaid package, right? If they're close to a hospital already that would accept that, why couldn't they do that? And a friend brought up, he's a military chaplain, and he brought up, he's like, well, there's special needs that veterans have that your typical hospital is not going to know with, they need to be able to deal with military related PTSD with all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm glad I know that's why. But then why aren't we doing a better job at that? And why isn't, and looking from that point of view, and if you talk to military families and stuff, they're like, yeah, you need to pay for their health care. You need to pay, I'm like, yeah, I agree. Those are really great. Why is that okay? And socialism is bad. Yeah, people don't know what they mean when they say socialism. I'm gonna reserve. I'm gonna put something on the table and reserve it. Okay. I want to say 30 seconds about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal. Pump your face all you want. I want to say a little something about that because I read a George Wills column, and twice a year I agree with George Wills, and I want to go back to that. Okay. But so let's go back to socialism because in my mind, some of the things are the same thing. It's about taking care of ourselves. Yeah. And so the idea is that where we draw the line is what we've been talking about forever. Is the debate is where do we draw the line? We should draw the line where it's more inclusive of people, taking care of people. And there's quotes from what you would consider really, hard right-wing sources. There's a Brigham Young quote about, if 10 people come to my door begging and only 9 of them actually needed it, I would have gladly given it so I could have helped the one. That's a pretty far over their line for Mr. Brigham Young. Well, look,
Well, and he was pretty socialist in his own right. We don't like to think about that in the same way.
He was, but I mean,
he had his own things going on in other situations. But
look, we used to have, and here's a parallel, because we used to have the same thing in the justice system. Mm-hmm. We would rather to see 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person be punished wrongly. But we've turned that around lately. We imprison people who are not guilty.
Yeah.
We capture much more.
Right, err on the side
of being tough on crime.
Right.
And like those two women. Mm-hmm. We're going to round them up because we don't know. Let's err on the side of enforcement rather than justice. Mm-hmm. And so now we do the same thing here. It's the old free rider problem. Oh my gosh, we can't have a program because there may be 10% of the people who use that program who may not deserve to use the program.
Right.
And so we're going to punish the 90%. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of a mentality. I love the one that I saw recently. It's a meme that floated around that said, when you have a surplus, build a bigger table, not a bigger wall.
Fence. Yep.
And that's what we need to be doing. And if you think about what the Book of Mormon teaches you about that, because, occasionally we have to remind ourselves that we're Latter-day Saints. Mm-hmm. What did the Nephites do? Right. Whenever there were Lamanites that were trying to get away from the Lamanite world, they took them in.
Yeah.
Whether it was the people whose children became the 2,000 stripling warriors, whether it was, the people of, whoever it was, if you wanted to give up, what did Moroni do in the war? If you will give up your arms and swear that you're not going to attack, then you're free to go.
Right. And that was erring on the side of, and the kind of people who are like, well, we have to have tough border security. I'm sure a lot of people need stuff, but we can't risk it, even if one bad seed gets in. I'm like, that's not what any of, and these are like, LDS people that have told me this. I'm like, that's not the lesson we get from any of those. That's not the lesson stories,
we should get. And so now applying that to politics, we ought to have a much broader safety net. I love the argument, in the Nordic countries, they've decided we have, look, we're going to create this entire safety culture. We're going to take the socialist approach, and we have far less problems as a result. But then, why can't this work in America?
Well, and everybody's quick to tell you a reason why it can't. Everybody's like, well, that's because they had a lot of oil money. That's because they have a less,
we have the
more homogenous society. That's because
we have the largest economy.
Like,
well, look at GDP.
We haven't even tried it a little bit, Like
we haven't exactly.
And, I was trying to find an exact quote from this, but I'll have to go back and read the whole talk one time. But Elder Suarez, one of the LDS apostles, gave a talk at BYU. So this is not scripture. I'm not one of those people who's like everything an apostle utters is. But he had a really cool outlook.
As a lawyer, it may not be binding, but it's persuasive.
Exactly. There you go. He had a really great point in this, and it was an hour-long devotional, so there's a lot of stuff in there. But he was talking about we should be really grateful for the things we have, that we have a free society, that we have, we're blessed with all these things, and then we should be putting a better emphasis on helping provide the same sort of safety and providing for the poor. Yeah. And the way he said it, it was really clear to me. And I know people are going to hear what they want to hear. I know I hear what I want to hear. But I was like, yeah, when we are blessed, it's like, because I have been given much, I too must give.
Exactly.
Right? When you have plenty, you have an obligation. And when I read Mormon scripture, that's what I see. When I read the Doctrine and Covenants, I find the verse in there. There's a verse in there that says, "It is not given that one man should have that which is above another.
That's right.
Wherefore the world lieth in sin."
In sin.
That's pretty
damning.
Yeah.
That is pretty accusatory.
Yeah, and you're like, well, he's not saying that you can't be rich. Well, he's not. If that's your first response, I'm sure we're not going 100% the other way, but we should all really be thinking about how much
there were no poor among them.
Exactly.
And the joke. Yeah. The joke I make with my friend, and I said, yeah, you're supposed to not have any poor among them. And her response is, listen, I come from Zion. We were all poor. Yeah. But we were equally poor. Yeah. Because she grew up in a little Mormon town.
And there's a criticism, too, of like, well, that's why socialism never works, because everybody's just poor. And, we're not...
No, and that's not true.
It's true in situations like, okay, Donald Trump loves to bring up Venezuela. Well, we don't want to be Venezuela. I was like, that's not the only socialist country that's ever existed.
But that's not the problem in Venezuela.
There's a ton of other problems going on there right now.
Exactly.
And obviously you have to be smart, and you have to rely on experts. You have to read things. You have to use data. You have to do your best.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
if things aren't, if they're well intentioned but not working, you have to reform them and try something else. It's not going to be something that's like it's either 100% works or 100% doesn't. That's never the way it works.
Nothing works 100%. Yeah,
but we need to make efforts towards it, whether personal life or as a society. And I guess that's where people would quibble. They said, "Well, that's just your personal life. You're supposed to go give charitable donations." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's not working. It's not going far enough.
That's not enough.
I can give stuff, but it's not going to single moms in Baltimore. It's not addressing.
We need to work together. And so I want to go back now to the Green New Deal, which somebody said to me. Somebody said to me, "There's nothing new in the Green New Deal. It's just the way it's packaged," and that's very true to a certain extent. And George Wells said, "Look, it's all pie in the sky. That we're going to give up oil by 2025, or that we're going to all of us be driving electric cars. Frankly, if that's the case, nobody's going across America because you can only go 200 miles a day. The problem is that there are two things, and one is we need to be realistic about what's going on in life, and we need to understand what reality is. There's no reality. Trump has no reality. His administration has no reality, and we need to be careful that we don't sort of serve pie in the sky stuff.
I agree with that, but I think it's also as a goal, as an aspiration.
As an aspiration, it makes sense. The Kennedy aspiration, we're going to go to the moon.
Right.
He didn't know when. He didn't put a date by it.
Right.
So,
and it's obviously, let's move that way, and why can't we move a bigger bulk?
Exactly. We can move that way, and we can make a difference that way.
And here's the other thing. Innovation doesn't happen in the status quo. Innovation happens with a strict challenge.
With a move.
And when you say, what if we tried to get America off of oil in 10 years? I don't think it's going to happen, but when you put a strict thing on that and then you try to see what you can do, you end up finding a lot better ways to get there. So I'm okay in terms of, and AOC is not the savior of the world, but I like the work that she's doing.
I like what she's doing because she's pushing
there's enough
the
of a
discussion.
There's enough of a popular
She's pushing the discussion in the right direction. And it's the same way with the socialism, to go back to that social. Right. We need to have people who move it in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you who the people are that most need it. Mm-hmm. It's the Trump supporters who have been left behind.
It's the red states. It's the people with no industries in their towns.
Yes. They're the ones who need more than anything else what's coming up next.
It's the dang people in Utah who don't have Medicaid.
Yes.
There's people here that I know who qualify for Medicaid, who are at that level, and the state sends them a letter and says, you qualify, but we don't have the funds, so you don't get
But they
anything.
have the funds.
You don't
we
get
just
anything.
choose not to use
it.
And
there's not a compromise. There's I'm going to pay for half of your thing. I'm going to give you a cheaper plan. Sorry, there's nothing we can do. And then, it's just you're left to figure it out, which detriments the entire society.
And one of the big lies of this current administration is look to the past. Mm-hmm. Look to the past. The past is never going to solve your problem.
Right.
You've got to look to the future. You've got to develop.
We've never been at the situation we're at right now.
No, exactly.
In the past. We've never had this many people in this small of an area. Like, we have to innovate and we have to grow.
It's an interesting, I tell people, I'm a socialist. I'm a Mormon socialist.
Yeah. Yeah, they love that. My mom loves that. I don't think I've ever told her the socialist part.
Anyway, you guys had a left talk this week.
We did. I really enjoyed it. We had one of our.
I say you guys because I wasn't there.
Yeah, it was like the same organization that we do our sisters' nights under the Latter-day Left community. We're not like this is the women only part and that's the men only part. We're not doing it that way. But we had a talk for women by women. I really enjoyed it. We had a smaller turnout because it was the middle of a snowstorm. But the good news is it's going to be. We recorded it. It's going to be online. We're working on the editing and getting it all sounding nice. And I really thought it was great. I want to really promote it. I was also one of the speakers, but that's not why I'm promoting it. I loved the other two speakers there. We had Holly Richardson and we had Melissa Leilani Larson, who's a playwright and screenwriter. And they were so cool. They had two totally different backgrounds with just like really interesting takes on a lot of different stuff. And I loved it. So that's going to be online soon. And we're working on getting a similar event up, co-ed. We're not going to have to call it co-ed, but we're working on having another Left Talks type event, hopefully this April. So that's another thing that keep on your radar we don't know who all our presenters are going to be, but we want to focus on constitutional law. I think you might be.
I may be one of the speakers.
You're kind of our local go-to law guy.
I may be one of the speakers.
So I think it's going to be really cool.
I did teach constitutional law for a few years.
Yeah, you've been around the block a time or two. So
hey, did you just call me old?
No,
is that ageism?
Going around the block is really fast. Takes like a year. I don't know where these idioms come from, but just so our listeners have that on their radar. And then, of course, as always, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and give us your thoughts. We're always welcome to be challenged because we're not the Utah people who get really upset if you say anything that sounds contradictory.
No, actually, we like it.
Yeah, we like a challenge. So send us whatever thoughts you had.
Have a good week.
We'll see you later.
As always, if you enjoy our show, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Our theme music is a selection from Tate Peterson's Midday Blues. You can find his music at freemusicarchive.com.